Welcome to the debate. Today we are looking at a very specific and high-stakes battlefield, the manufacturing and construction sectors of Greece. We aren't just talking about pouring concrete or assembling parts. We're looking at how these really traditional industries are attempting to transition into the knowledge economy. And we have empirical evidence on the table, specifically from the Prime International Journal, and a deep dive case study of a major construction firm, Rodex, that suggests Greek companies are at a real tipping point.
Yeah, it's a fascinating case study because it sort of exposes a universal problem, but one that is hyper amplified in the Greek context. I mean, we are looking at organizations that have bought all the right technology, the hardware of knowledge management, but seem to be hitting this cultural glass ceiling.
And that is the tension. So here is the central question we're debating today. Does the primary challenge for Greek organizations lie in the technical acquisition and creation of knowledge? Building the systems. Or does it lie in a cultural incapacity to disseminate that knowledge across the hierarchy? I'm arguing for the former. The data shows that when Greek firms build the hard structures, the databases, the intranets, the codified processes, they see a direct statistical spike in new product performance. The machinery, it works.
And I take the opposing view. The machinery might be running, but I think the gears are grinding. I'd argue that while Greek companies are excellent at acquisition, gathering information, there's a broken link when it comes to dissemination. The challenge isn't technical, it is deeply human. It's about trust, incentives, and a fundamental failure to convert individual learning into organizational power, because the culture just won't allow it.
Okay, well, let's get into the evidence. I want to anchor my position in the study by Chatsoudas, Felisaridou, and Saraganidis. This wasn't a small sample. They surveyed 156 Greek manufacturing companies. We're talking about heavy industry here. And the statistical regression analysis was, frankly, crystal clear. Knowledge integration and knowledge innovation have a significant positive impact on new product performance.
Okay, but I don't dispute that integration helps if it happens, but it feels like you're cherry-picking the success metric a little bit.
I'm looking at the bottom line. When these companies create structures to integrate what they know, taking data from the lab and getting it to the factory floor, they make better products. This just refutes the idea that Greek industry is somehow archaic or resistant to change. They are successfully leveraging KM, knowledge management, to compete globally. Whether it's EPC contracting, engineering, procurement, and construction, or heavy manufacturing, the ability to capture knowledge is translating directly to market success.
You mentioned integration, which is fair, but you completely sidestep the most alarming finding in that very same Chatsoudas study. The researchers found that knowledge acquisition and knowledge dissemination fail to act as enhancing factors for performance. That is a massive contradiction to standard management theory.
How so?
Well, think about it. Acquisition is the act of bringing knowledge into the company. Market research, reading patents, hiring experts. The study says Greek firms are doing this, but it's not actually making them perform better. And dissemination, sharing that knowledge among employees, that also showed no statistical link to performance. It suggests a system that's clogged with knowledge waste. They're acquiring data that just sits in a drawer, or they're sharing information that nobody uses. That isn't a success story. That's inefficiency on a grand scale.
I interpret that differently. I think it points to a filtering problem which is technically solvable, rather than some kind of cultural dead end. But let's look at the hardware aspect, because I think that's really where the solution lies. The University of Piraeus material we reviewed talks about codification strategy. This is the conversion of tacit knowledge, what's in a veteran engineer's head, into explicit knowledge. Manuals, blueprints, algorithms.
The dream of every manager. Turn the employee into a manual.
It's not about dehumanizing. It's about scaling. In the construction industry, turnover is high. Projects are transient. If you don't have a robust IT infrastructure to capture that knowledge, it just walks out the door every day at 5 p.m. Look at the Rodex case study. This is a real player in the energy sector. They didn't just hope for people to talk more. They implemented a massive IT overhaul, databases, intranets, formal reporting structures. They moved from chaos to codification.
And did it work?
Because when I look at the RODEX data, specifically the employee survey, using the DLOQ method, that's the Dimensions of the Learning Organization questionnaire, I see a very different story.
But they reorganized the entire company. They moved to a middle up-down management style.
They changed the org chart, yes, but looking at those DLOQ scores, while continuous learning was rated moderately high, meaning individuals wanted to learn, the scores for empowerment and strategic leadership were mediocre at best. And most damning of all, the scores for systems to capture knowledge were not perceived as effective by the very people who were supposed to be using them. You can build the most sophisticated internet in the world, but if the engineer on the ground feels disempowered, that database is going to stay empty.
But the company survived and expanded. That's the ultimate metric, isn't it? You're focusing on employee sentiment. I'm focusing on market survival. The RODEX case proves that even with imperfect humanware, the hardware saved them. They used these systems to standardize their entire design and development division. That structural change forced collaboration where it didn't exist before.
Forced collaboration is not the same as knowledge sharing. And this brings us right back to the dissemination paradox in the wider manufacturing study. Why did dissemination fail to improve performance across all 156 of those companies? I believe the answer is in the Euphoria Project findings. They described the knowledge society in Greece as a blurred concept.
That sounds like a vague academic term. What does it actually mean in a shipyard or a factory?
It means we have a veneer of modernization over a traditional low-trust hierarchy. The Euphoria findings suggest that while IT infrastructure investment has skyrocketed, competitiveness hasn't kept pace. And why? Because in many Greek organizations, knowledge is still viewed as personal power. If I know how to fix a machine and you don't, I am indispensable. The moment I put that knowledge into your database, I become replaceable. The hardware you love so much actually threatens the individual status in a low-trust culture.
That's a cynical view, and I think it underestimates the pressure of the global market. The Chatzuta study explicitly links marketing and manufacturing competencies to better knowledge integration. This implies that the market itself is forcing these silos to break down. I mean, you can't hide your secrets when you have a delivery deadline for a client in Germany or China. The silo effect is a luxury of a protected market. Greek firms just don't have that luxury anymore.
They're forced to deliver, yes. But are they learning from it? The study suggests knowledge waste is a huge problem. This is where companies acquire knowledge, maybe they buy a competitor's report or hire a consultant, but because of that lack of trust, the knowledge gets rejected by the organizational immune system. It's the not invented here syndrome on steroids. The data shows they're spending money on acquisition, but it's not turning into profit. That is a management failure, not a software failure.
I would argue that knowledge waste is exactly why you need more rigid systems, not fewer. If people are hoarding knowledge, you don't just wait for them to become altruistic. You mandate the input. The University of Piraeus text highlights the importance of knowledge portals and enterprise resource planning, ERP systems. You make populating the database a KPI.
KPI is the magic word that ruins everything.
It's how you manage at scale. If you can't measure it, you can't manage it.
But you're trying to measure the unmeasurable. We have to talk about the difference between explicit and tacit knowledge. Explicit knowledge is easy. The melting point of this alloy is X. You can put that in a database. But tacit knowledge? That's the intuition of the foreman who knows the cement mix is wrong just by the smell of it. It's the context, the externalization phase of the SCI model. Socialization, externalization, combination, internalization is incredibly difficult.
But it's the goal. The SCI model is the roadmap. You have to move from socialization, just chatting at the water cooler, to externalization, which is writing it down.
Correct. But that transition, that requires a social contract. The RODEX survey showed that employees felt they were not rewarded for sharing what they learned. If you force that foreman to fill out a form about his intuition, and you don't reward him for it, or worse, he feels he's giving away his competitive edge, he will fill the form with garbage. He will tick the boxes to satisfy your KPI, but the real knowledge stays in his head, and you end up with a database full of noise.
So what's the alternative? Let him retire and take all that knowledge with him? That is the definition of organizational suicide. The codification strategy might be imperfect. And it might face resistance, sure, but it is the only way to build an asset that belongs to the company rather than the employee. Rodix understood this. They didn't just install software, they physically reorganized the office. They put the different departments in the same room.
That's socialization. That's the one part that actually works because it's human.
It's structural. That is my point. They used a structural change, literally where people sit, to force the human connection. That is hardware, dictating humanware, and it worked. The study notes that despite those low empowerment scores, the reorganization allowed them to solve complex projects in their energy projects. They engineered the collaboration.
They engineered proximity. But I keep going back to this dissemination paradox. If structural integration is so effective, why did the broad statistical study show that dissemination has zero impact on performance?
Well, perhaps because dissemination in the traditional sense is obsolete. The study might be measuring old-school dissemination, meetings, memos, reports. The integration variable, which was positive, measures something deeper, the synthesis of knowledge into the product itself. Maybe we don't need people to share in the sense of teaching each other. We just need their inputs to combine effectively in the final design.
That's a very charitable reading. I think the dissemination failure points to the quality of the information being moved around. The University of Piraeus source warns about this. It mentions that factors like lack of interpersonal relationships and lack of organizational trust are capable of suspending KM entirely. If I don't trust the source of the data, I don't use it. The hardware can deliver the file to my inbox instantly, but if the culture says watch your back, I just delete the file.
Okay, you're emphasizing trust, but you're ignoring competence. The Chatsoothes study showed that marketing competence and manufacturing competence are strong predictors of success. This suggests that technical excellence is what drives the process. If a Greek manufacturer is world-class at making cement or aluminum, that competence creates a kind of gravity that pulls knowledge together. The culture of excellence overrides the culture of suspicion.
Competence is necessary, but it's not sufficient for growth. Competence maintains the status quo. Innovation requires risk, and sharing a new idea is a risk. The Rodax employees rated risk-taking as a middling factor. If you work in a rigid hierarchy, which is still the norm in Greece, you don't take risks, you just do what the boss says. And this brings us to that middle, up, down management style Rodax tried to implement.
Which is a fascinating concept. It's not top-down, and it's not bottom-up. It uses middle managers as the bridge.
In theory, yes, the knowledge engineers. But in practice, without the right incentives, those middle managers just become gatekeepers. The fact that the DLOQ scores for systems to capture knowledge were so low tells me that the middle managers weren't effectively translating the vision. They were, perhaps just overwhelmed by the bureaucracy of the new system.
Or perhaps they were just learning. We have to view this on a timeline. These studies capture a moment of transition. The fact that Rodax and these 156 manufacturers are even attempting these complex KM strategies is a massive leap forward from the family-run, intuition-based businesses of the past. The friction you see is the friction of progress. The hardware is being installed and the humanware is slowly, maybe painfully, rebooting to match it.
Rebooting is a nice metaphor, but human beings aren't operating systems. You can't just patch the trust bug. The data indicates that Greek companies are over-indexing on the tools because tools are something you can buy. You can write a check for a new ERP system. You can't write a check for trust.
You can write a check for incentives, though.
But are they? The survey said no. Rewards for sharing were low.
Then that is the structural fix. This confirms my argument. The problem isn't some mystical Greek culture that refuses to share. The problem is a structural failure to align compensation with KM goals. If Rodax changes their bonus structure to weight knowledge contribution at 20%, those DLOQ scores change overnight. It's an adjustment of the hardware, the compensation logic.
I disagree that money solves the tacit knowledge problem. You cannot pay someone enough to care about the long-term health of the organization if they feel treated like a cog. Empowerment was the other low score. Empowerment means having a say in the direction of the work. If I am just a data entry node in your knowledge portal, I am not empowered. I am administered, and administered people do the bare minimum.
And yet, look at the knowledge innovation stat. It had a positive impact on performance. Somewhere, despite the lack of empowerment, despite the administered feeling you describe, innovation is happening. The products are getting better. This suggests that you don't need everyone to be happy and empowered to get results. You just need the system to extract the necessary information to drive the innovation engine. It's utilitarian, perhaps, but it's effective.
Effective for now, but is it sustainable? The knowledge waste issue suggests diminishing returns. If you keep pouring water into a leaky bucket, you might keep the level up for a while, but you are wasting a lot of water. The euphoria findings suggest that without fixing the blurred concept of the knowledge society, without making it a true value rather than just a process, competitiveness will stall. The IT infrastructure will become a legacy burden, not an asset.
I see the risk of the leaky bucket, but I would argue that technology is the sealant. We're moving toward AI and machine learning. Soon, the dissemination problem might be solved by algorithms that push the right knowledge to the right person without them even asking. The curating that the University of Piraeus talks about won't be done by a fearful middle manager. It will be done by a neutral AI.
Now, who's being optimistic? Relying on AI to solve a human trust problem is the ultimate hardware fantasy. If the input data is bad because the humans didn't trust the system enough to put the truth in, the AI will just hallucinate efficiency.
We shall see. But as we look at the evidence today, the trend line is undeniable. The Chaudzutis study is a wake-up call. It proves that KM is not a buzzword, it's a revenue driver. For the Greek manufacturing and construction sectors, the path forward is clear. Double down on the structures, build the reservoirs for knowledge. Even if the culture lags behind, the competitive advantage of the hardware is robust enough to pull the industry forward.
And my takeaway is a warning label on that path. The dissemination paradox is real. Buying the system is not the same as building the capability. The low scores on empowerment and the failure of dissemination to link to performance prove that the humanware is the bottleneck. Until Greek leadership addresses the soft issues of trust, recognition, and psychological safety, they are driving a Ferrari with the handbrake on.
It creates a compelling tension for sure. We have a sector that clearly understands the value of knowledge but is struggling with the mechanics of its flow.
It certainly suggests there's more to explore in the source material, particularly regarding how leadership can bridge that gap between the server room and the break room.
Absolutely. We encourage you to dig into the Prime International Journal study and the RODX case analysis yourself. The numbers tell a very detailed story.
There's always more to the story.
Thank you for listening to The Debate.